So now my job is to compute the GPA for every student. So here in this data frame, we have two students. We have Bob and we have Alice. And we want to compute the GPA for both of them. So first of all, let me enter this. So this is now named scores. Like the name is not that important. So we can display scores as a data frame to make sure we understand what's going on. So it's like that. So there are rows with Bob and there are rows with Alice, and we have the scores. So the process is still the same. We still need to convert all the scores to grade points first, and then we have an extra step, which is to separately average the grade points for Bob and for Alice. So let's first, again, do this outside of the function, and then we can work on putting that in the function. So I have my scores here. So the first thing I want to do is I want to add another column, which is going to contain the grade point values for the scores. So that's a mutate. So I'll say mutate, and I'll say GP is, so same approach as before. We can't really use num to GP of scores directly, because num to GP cannot be applied to a vector. It must be applied to individual elements of the vector. So I'll say sapply as before. So x is going to be score. So the difference here is here we're inside of mutate. So that's why here I have to say scores $score. Here, in fact, I must not say scores $score. I should just say score. Because inside of the mutate, we know that we are working with this data frame scores, this one. So we don't need to specify, and in fact, we shouldn't specify because that will mess up group bys if we have any. So we say x is equal to score, and we say fun is num to GP, like that. So I can check to see what happens if I run it. Well, I need tidyverse here. So, okay, so the value of this is another data frame which has this grade point column. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to compute the average grade point for Bob and the average grade point for Alice. So that's a job for group by plus summarize, right? Because I can say, well, I have this group of rows, that's Bob, and I have this group of rows, that's Alice, and for each of those, I need to compute the mean of the grade points. So that's exactly what I'll do. So I'll say group by name. So because what happens is the thing that those rows have in common is that the value of name is the same. The thing that those ones have in common is, again, that they're all for Alice. So we'll say group by name, and then we'll say summarize. So here this would be GPA, so that's just the name, but grade point average makes sense. And we'll say mean of GP. So if I run all of that, I get this kind of table where I have the GPA for Alice and the GPA for Bob. Right? So what summarize does is it creates a whole new data frame. It's not like mutate, which just kind of adds a column. It's a completely new data frame, and here the columns that are kept is the things that were grouped by. So in this case, we grouped by name. So that's retained in order to identify for which group the mean is computed. And then we are also saying we want this new column GPA, which is going to be the mean of the old column GP. So what's left to do now is put this in a function. That's really easy. So all that we need to do is we need just to say, okay, so the function would be compute student GPAs, I guess is what was required. And then we'll say function, and what information do we need? Well, we need the scores. And what we'll compute is this value. So now if I say compute student GPAs and I give it scores, this one, let's make sure that it's been read in, I'll get the value of this thing, which is the GPAs for each one of the students.